pieces of steel, caged in the tanker that sank to the bottom of the North Sea. 8 months after the collision that forced the Tricolor to the seabed, the salvage operation has begun. These 2 floating cranes raised the first section of the 3,000-ton stern today, aided by 6 boats and a diving support vessel. The wreckage of the Tricolor has been lying below the surface of one of the world's busiest sea lanes since December, when heavy fog caused it to collide with the Kariba, another cargo ship, about 35 kilometers north of Dunkirk. In the weeks that followed, 3 other ships collided with the Tricolor, adding pressure to the salvage and removal of the wreck. The ship is being carved into 9 sections, using a specially designed diamond-encrusted wire.
We have used this cutting wire on the Kursk submarine, the Russian submarine, but that submarine was already very badly damaged and wasn't so strong as this Tricolor is right now. So that's we used it before, but in the middle of the ocean, on these circumstances, that's quite new, and well, it worked fine for the first cut. Let's wait on what will happen with the other ones.
The first section of the tanker was severed on Thursday. The operation is expected to keep these crews at sea until September, as the 20,000-ton ship is carved up, its once precious cargo rescued from the depths of the sea and taken to be destroyed. Candice Talberg, BBC News.
More than 100 people from the British-owned island of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean are seeking refuge in the UK. They're part of a community of 5,000 who were evicted from the island more than 30 years ago to make way for a US airbase. The group in the UK want the British government to accelerate a court decision on whether they can return to Diego Garcia or receive compensation.
Evicted from their home in the tropics, these people from Diego Garcia have come to Britain to seek justice. Their island may be a mere speck in the Indian Ocean, but it's become a vital staging post for American power. Now these people want it back. Alan Venkatasan was a baby when his family left more than 30 years ago. His grandfather was the last to leave. He later died on Mauritius. Alan and about 100 fellow Diego Garcians have come to Britain to try to get the jobs and education which are lacking in Mauritius. But they're also seeking from the High Court compensation and the right to return to their homes on Diego Garcia.
We can't believe it to see British citizens in this world in the year 2003. They are deprived of their rights, whereas our country, our land, the UK, they have got a policy to defend the human rights, and we just can't believe it.
It was from Diego Garcia that American bombers attacked both Afghanistan and Iraq. Even if the islanders win their case in London, the question is, will the Americans allow them back?
I think it's a case of American dominance over British policy. What is necessary is for Britain to start actively planning and putting resettlement into place.
The government here has tried to keep the people of Diego Garcia out of sight and out of mind, and is making no comment until the High Court's ruling here this autumn. The Diego Garcians themselves have won one significant right, and that is the right to own full British passports. It's a right they're exercising in growing numbers to come to Britain and make sure their voice is heard.
The last came in 73.
It's been 20 years since John Madeley wrote the last definitive report on Diego Garcia. Time enough for Britain to put right an historic wrong.
Yeah. There's been nothing like it as far as I can see in the last 100 years at least. Here you have a Western nation effectively kidnapping its own people and taking them off their islands, people that it should be protecting, and then really showing an awful, cruel disdain for them.
It's not right.
Britain's last colonial cast-offs are coming home to roost. How long they stay, well, that's up to London and Washington.
Pictures. I've had enough of pictures. I want to see it by myself.
Jim Fish, BBC News.
This year's Edinburgh Fringe Festival has begun. Ticket sales look likely to reach record levels despite some of the main venues having been destroyed by fire last year. The world's largest arts festival began with a cavalcade through the streets of the city.
This is it, the start of the world's biggest arts festival, and where else to celebrate it but here on the streets of Edinburgh. An estimated 160,000 people lined Princes Street this afternoon to catch a glimpse of this year's cavalcade. Although it marks the start of the Fringe, there's a place in the parade for performers from all the other Edinburgh festivals.
It's one of the few events that actually includes everybody. You know, the official festival, the Fringe, the Jazz Festival, Book Festival, the Two, all taking part. And it's really by way of sort of setting off the festival season in Edinburgh.
And it looks like being a busy month. The 57th Edinburgh Fringe will host some 21,000 performances at a record 207 venues. And they're already reporting an increase on advance ticket sales.
August is becoming more and more a month when reality of Edinburgh is suspended. Crime still takes place, incidents still take place, the numbers of police officers don't increase. Fortunately, the vast majority of festival events and fringe events are good-humoured, well run, and make life an awful lot easier for us.
And we haven't seen the back of it yet. Edinburgh will be on festival duty from now until the end of August. Polly McLean, BBC News.
3 rare white tigers have been born in captivity in China. The cubs, 2 females and a male, were born in northeast China. Harbin Zoo imported the cubs' parents from Sweden and Italy in 2000. This is the 3rd time the female has given birth. There are only about 200 white tigers left in the world. And the main news again. Preparations are being made in Liberia for the arrival of 300 peacekeeping troops. The soldiers from Nigeria are due to fly into the capital Monrovia later to pave the way for the deployment of a larger regional force. This is BBC News.
Hello again. It was a hot day for some of us yesterday. London seeing 30 degrees Celsius. And this week, the temperatures are set to rise, not just in London, but throughout the land. It's also going to be dry for many of us, a slight risk of thunderstorms, and this setup looks like lasting into next weekend. Now, high pressure is firmly in charge of our weather at the moment, hence the settled conditions. This front in the west is likely to produce a bit more cloud and some splashes of rain, not much, in Northern Ireland and Western Scotland this morning. But here too, it's an improving picture. And the high pressure remains with us tomorrow too. And if you look at the spacing of the isobars, we're looking at a bit of a breeze coming in to the east. So that at least means it will be cooler on the east coast. In fact, around the coast generally, it is going to be cooler. But there's also a risk of some fret coming in too. And high pressure remains with us on Wednesday. And as the temperatures continue to rise, there's the increasing risk of some thunderstorms as well. Now, so far this year, the highest temperature we've had was in Wisley, 33.6 Celsius on the 15th of July. Incidentally, the highest temperature ever recorded in the UK was in Cheltenham on the 3rd of August 1990, and that was 37.1 Celsius. Now, we can expect the mid-30s in England and Wales this week, perhaps 35, 36 Celsius. 36 Celsius is 97 Fahrenheit, and that is going to feel hot. It's also going to feel humid for some of us too. Looking at the average temperatures, range really from 14 to a high of about 23. And the other thing to look at are the colours on this chart, because when I run the temperature profile, they certainly darken. Now, the darker the colour, the higher the temperature, and that's going to extend right the way up to the north of Scotland and right the way up to the north of Northern Ireland as well, but always cooler on the coast. So for this morning, we've got some patchy mist and fog affecting East Anglia and the southeast. There's a risk some of that may make it up the Thames estuary, but it is just a small risk. And then that will burn away quite readily and we'll see some lovely sunshine. Now, for Northern Ireland and Scotland, a bit more cloud in the north and west, and this could produce the odd splash of rain in the morning, but it should improve here too as we go through the afternoon. At the same time, there's an increasing risk, albeit a small one, of a thundery shower perhaps later in the day for the southwest of England and possibly Wales. Now, top temperatures today about 33 degrees Celsius inland, but pushed down to the coast where we've got a stiff breeze coming through the Straits of Dover, and say in Kent on the coast we'll be looking at a high of 22 degrees Celsius, a more comfortable 72 Fahrenheit. Speaking of the coast, if you're off to Bideford today or tomorrow, we're looking at plenty sunshine and a high of 27 Celsius. And in Bournemouth, a very similar story. And in St Peter's Port, again, by the time we get to Tuesday, the temperature will have gone up to about 28. For Cowes Week, which is now underway, the weather looks set to be fine and very warm. force for easterly developing before we've been looking at sea breezes. For Tuesday then, there'll be a bit more cloud around, an increasing risk of a shower, more so than on Monday, but there'll also be some sunshine. It's going to feel humid for many of us too. Look how the temperatures are on the up. For example, if you're off to the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh, you'll be looking at a high of 28 and 35, maybe 36 as we push down into London. So if you are out and about with temperatures around about 10 degrees above average, well, it's not going to feel particularly pleasant for many of us. Records could be broken by day and night, and there's a risk of heat stress for both humans and animals. I'll leave you with the summary.
There are more voices to be heard. Hard-hitting, hard talk, next on BBC News 24.
The battle is on to save some of Britain's most historic buildings. Some will live, others may die. Your votes decide. For Britain's endangered buildings, it's a matter of life or death. Restoration starts Friday at 9 on BBC Two.
Good morning, this is BBC News 24. I'm Martine Croxall. In just a moment, Hard Talk, but first a summary of the main news at 4:30. Late last night, an aid flight took off from the UK bound for Liberia. The plane is carrying more than 30 tonnes of humanitarian supplies for the people in the war-torn country. But the charity Save the Children, which organised the flight, say that looting could be a problem when the supplies arrive. And there are growing fears of a looming humanitarian crisis among the victims of Liberia's 4-year civil war, many of whom have lost their homes because of the fighting. And there's been further fighting in the capital Monrovia ahead of the arrival of peacekeepers. An initial contingent of Nigerian peacekeepers is due in the city later today to help quell civil unrest. Irish police say they've uncovered what they believe is a terrorist training camp near the border of Tipperary and Waterford in the south of the country. 10 men have been arrested and a quantity of guns and ammunition recovered from the scene. The men are all thought to belong to the dissident Republican organisation, the Continuity IRA. Anglican church leaders in the United States have for the first time elected an openly gay priest as a bishop. The proposed appointment of the Reverend Gene Robinson as Bishop of New Hampshire has divided the church in America. The House of Bishops still has to ratify the vote later today. 3 Israelis have been wounded in a shooting attack on their car at a checkpoint between Jerusalem and the West Bank town of Bethlehem. A mother of 2 was seriously wounded in the attack. Her 2 children were also injured. Reports say the Palestinian militant group, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, has claimed responsibility for the attack. Al-Aqsa threatened to resume attacks on Israel after 20 of its members were detained by Palestinian security forces on Saturday. A top executive of South Korea's Hyundai conglomerate, who was involved in a major scandal 3 years ago, has committed suicide. Police say Chung Won-hun jumped to his death from the 12th floor of the Hyundai building in central Seoul. The executive was embroiled in a scandal in 2000 over an historic summit between North and South Korea. Cigarette packs in Europe could soon carry graphic images showing the harmful effects of tobacco. In the near future, boxes could be sporting lurid images of cancer-ravaged organs to remind smokers how they're damaging their health. A recent poll revealed that current messages on the packs are being ignored by many smokers. A separate study showed that regularly updated graphic images combined with health warnings may be the most effective way to prevent smokers from lighting up. The Prince of Wales moves house today. His new residence is Clarence House. The Queen Mother's former home has undergone a multi-million-pound renovation ahead of the Prince's arrival from St James's Palace. It was the Queen Mother's principal home from 1953 until her death last year. The refurbishment is said to have cost nearly £4.5 million and will be paid for by taxpayers. City dwellers are snapping up small rural farms to get a taste of the country life. A survey by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors revealed that almost half the people buying farms are not farmers. The study says that 44% of farm buyers are well-to-do city dwellers who don't intend to work on the land. That's the news at 4:33. Now on BBC News 24, it's time for Hard Talk.
Why did Britain go to war in Iraq is still the question dominating British politics as a judicial inquiry gets underway into the death of a government scientist who figured large in the debate. My guest today is a member of the Parliamentary Foreign Affairs Select Committee that looked into the reasons for war and now warns that Britain is still at serious risk from the Al-Qaeda terrorist group. Did the government focus on the wrong threat? Richard Ottaway, a very warm welcome to the programme.
Nice to be here.
What the committee seems to be saying is the government took its eye off the main ball and actually harmed efforts to neutralise the major threat facing Britain. Is that the way you see it?
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee principally conducted an inquiry into the case for war. Had it been exaggerated? Was it genuine? Had there been any misrepresentation? And halfway through it, we had this bombshell of, first of all, of Alistair Campbell accusing the BBC of exaggerating his involvement, and then, of course, the tragic death of Dr. Kelly.
I want to come on to some of those things in detail, but,
yes.
But as far as Al-Qaeda is concerned, the committee talks about 17,000 troops out there loyal to Al-Qaeda, and what you seem to be basically saying is that the government went for the wrong threat. Or the less immediate threat. The committee says the war in Iraq might in fact have impeded the war against Al-Qaeda. That's a very serious charge.
Well, there's no doubt about it. There's plenty of reports that the government was in receipt of information that Syria and Iran were bigger threats than Iraq, that there were Al-Qaeda troops out there in the ground, that the situation in Afghanistan is far from settled. And of course, as the latest report from the Foreign Affairs Select Committee made quite clear, the American president, he saw the case for war as the battle against terrorism. And his words were that he made no difference between terrorists and countries that supported terrorism. And so that's how he made the quantum leap from the battle against Al-Qaeda in the aftermath of 11th of September.
But your committee is specifically ruling out that link, at least in the case of Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein.
Yes, but there would seem to be no clear evidence between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. But there are no doubt about it, there are countries out there in the Middle East who do support terrorism. And Bush, he wanted to send a message to those countries that if you support terrorists who mess with us, we are going to mess with you. And that is the rather flaky basis on which the United States went to war. And of course, this is where you get into trouble, or where the British government's got into trouble in trying to substantiate its case for war, because it knew full well that the British people wouldn't accept a loose case against terrorism as a basis for invading Iraq.
You call it a flaky basis, but it was a flaky basis that your party supported, the Conservative Party supported, this flaky case for going to war.
The Conservative Party knows no more, was in receipt of no more information than you or any of your listeners were.
That's not strictly true, is it? Because Ian Duncan Smith was privy to intelligence briefings that none of us got.
Ian Duncan Smith was privy only to two meetings. The rest of us, backbenchers, were not privy to this at all. I got my information not from Ian Duncan Smith, I got it from the Prime Minister, Secretary of State for Defence, Foreign Secretary, in statements that they made on the floor of the House of Commons.
No, but he went round, nevertheless, with his briefings and the ability to ask whatever questions he wanted, saying Saddam Hussein has the means, the mentality and the motive to pose a direct threat to our national security. He went round repeating that.
Yep.
Numerous times, on what you now call the flaky basis for going to war.
He
got it wrong, didn't he?
He was basing it on intelligence briefings that he received. He looked at this document here, the case for Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, which says that they tried to buy uranium in Africa. It says that weapons of mass destruction could be deployed within 45 minutes. Ian Duncan Smith, I, the Conservative Party, we relied on this information.
You bought a pup, didn't you?
I think that's...
You all bought a pup.
I think that is exaggerated, frankly. At the moment, if you ask...
Pauline Neville-Jones, former chairperson of the Joint Intelligence Committee, says that everyone bought a pup.
Maybe we did buy a pup, but if we find weapons of mass destruction tomorrow, your question would look a bit silly.
If you find them, do you find the American claim that they've found evidence of an active programme in any way convincing? It's from David Kay, the former UN weapons inspector.
I need to see this at the moment. I mean, it is a quantum leap to say that they had weapons of mass destruction and they're finding evidence of a programme. I mean, the Prime Minister's already tried to make this leap. That is not good enough. To me, I want to be reassured that I made the right decision in supporting the case for war. I want to see...
You want to see a weapon?
I want to see a weapon. I want to see it revealed.
You didn't go to war for a programme. You didn't vote for a programme.
I do not think that the regime change is a good enough reason for going to war. I think that we only go to war if the region and the world's interests are affected. I believed the Prime Minister when he told me that our interests were under threat. I believed him when he said that the inference was that possibly a nuclear weapon could be available within a year.
But I come back to this point, and Malcolm Rifkin raised it last year. He's saying that the party should have asked, Conservative Party should have asked more probing questions.
Yes.
In a way, it ignored its duty as an opposition.
Frankly, I thought Ian Duncan Smith did the right thing to support the government when he went to war. In fact, I would not have been comfortable as a
Or just leapt on Washington's bandwagon.
Or as a Conservative MP, I would not be comfortable seeing Britain's troops going to war with us opposing it. Of course we have questions about it. Of course we have our doubts and uncertainties. And I think, frankly, I think it's a slight exaggeration to say that we were jumping on Washington's bandwagon. A legitimate case was made out. It has been exposed as having some flaky elements to it at the moment, and that is what the cause for concern is. But
so you regret that the Conservative Party leapt on Washington's bandwagon?
Not yet, because as I said...
So you're preparing to regret it, are you?
No,
if walking down that path.
The longer we go on down the road, not finding weapons of mass destruction, the more doubts come into your mind as to whether or not you made the right decision. We haven't reached that point yet. I think that the survey group should be entitled to have time to go and find those weapons, but at the moment they're not coming out, and the doubts grow, and that is the government's problem.
And at the moment we have a full-scale split over intelligence between London and Washington over the two major planks that were used to support the case for war. The 45-minute claim that weapons of mass destruction could be deployed within 45 minutes, and the active search for nuclear material in West Africa. Those two claims severely undermined by the row, apparent row between British and American intelligence. Where do you come down on that row?
I share the doubts of the Americans, frankly. You
lost faith in British intelligence?
I think there's a large question mark over British intelligence at the moment, and unless, I don't speak to British intelligence. It comes through the Foreign Secretary. The statements of the intelligence services are being called into question at the moment. Taking, first of all, the uranium, the allegations were made that Iraq sought to buy uranium from Niger were first of all based on documents which subsequently proved to be false. And the CIA carried out their own investigations there and found that there was no case to support it. Britain is now saying that it is relying on sources from other countries that it was a valid claim. But
you don't know what those sources are?
Who knows? Who knows what they are?
And you didn't get any response?
We did ask, and we were told that these were just intelligence sources and they couldn't be revealed. Now, it has been, I've read in the newspapers that these were intelligence sources from France and Italy. And if it was from France, it would explain why the information wasn't passed on to the United States, but it doesn't explain why France opposed the war if they knew full well that Iraq was trying to buy uranium.
Can we talk for a moment about the reservations which the CIA had? You asked the Foreign Office, these were written questions, you've got written responses, you asked them what reservations and comments did the CIA express, and the answer came back, the CIA made a number of comments. You can't be satisfied with an answer
I
like
know,
that, are you?
and what's more, Parliament hasn't been told what those comments are. We've been told that this is an intelligence report and can't be published.
So this is an evasive answer,
yes,
isn't it?
And every time we do ask straight questions, which could quite easily have a yes/no answer, we are getting evasive responses.
Which tells you
which
what?
tells me that there's trouble. The evidence is flaky.
Isn't it a fact that there are a whole raft of CIA objections about some of the cases that Britain made?
I suspect that is the case, and which is why, I mean, President Bush and Tony Blair obviously get on quite well, and it is actually quite serious for President Bush to say that he shouldn't refer to this in his State of the Union speech, and to say that the evidence is unreliable. And he knew full well that this would cause trouble for the Prime Minister. And so the CIA obviously feel pretty strongly about it.
Do you know where this 45-minute claim came from? Because here you had it rejected by the government scientist, Dr. David Kelly, who poured scorn on it.
Yes.
You have it rejected by the CIA,
yes.
and yet it still finds its way
yes.
into this government's comments about the war and its excuse.
It seems to have come from a single uncorroborated source. This is was in Andrew Gilligan's reports.
The BBC reporter at the centre of the row between
exactly.
BBC and the government.
It seems to have been there. It seems to have been published in the media. And frankly, given that someone of the eminence of and experience of Dr. Kelly before his tragic death should say that he thought it highly unlikely that it was true in his evidence to the Select Committee, I find it extraordinary that the government continues to rely upon it. Now, just to go back, you were saying to me you were sold a pup, weren't you? Well, when you start to look at this sort of the weaknesses in these arguments on 45 minutes in uranium, the more you begin to think that possibly you were sold a pup.
Talking of David Kelly, a government scientist who died 2 days after giving evidence to your committee, was it worth it?
Well, for all of us involved, it was a pretty shattering experience, having a witness who just interviewed 2 days beforehand. Frankly, I don't think he'd added anything. I think the whole episode of the MOD announcing that they had a source was intended as a distraction from the questions you've just been asking me about.
He shouldn't have been there. He shouldn't have been there.
The MOD, if they knew, if Dr. Kelly went to the Ministry of Defence and said, I think it's possible that I may have been Mr. Gilligan's source, I think that they should have, having discussed it with him, they should have kept it to themselves. There was no need, didn't add anything to announce that they knew the source, unless they were actually trying to distract attention away from other things.
Your committee is clear that he was badly treated, or the accusation has been made he was badly treated by the Ministry of Defence.
Yes.
He was badly treated by your committee too, wasn't he?
Well, I'm personally satisfied with my own conduct as far as that's concerned.
Well, speaking collectively of the committee, I mean, one member referred to him as chaff and a fall guy.
You're talking about my colleague, the Labour MP Andrew McKinley here, and I was sitting next to him when he asked it. I've known Andrew for many years, and actually I genuinely think he thought he was being helpful to Dr. Kelly. I think he was trying to say, look, I don't blame you, you've been set up, haven't you? And, you know, you've had the decency to come along here, and frankly, we are critical of your bosses.
He was never going to answer that, was he?
Well, because he was a decent man. But I don't think Andrew McKinley did it in a malicious or malevolent way.
But here was a man who was unused to the spotlight, a man who toiled away in government offices on some of the most sensitive scientific issues that this country has dealt with, totally unused to the media spotlight. And here he was in front of your committee being pushed to his limits, wasn't he?
Yes.
Didn't you have a sense of that at the time?
Yes, I did. Straight away from the moment he arrived.
Couldn't you have called a halt?
And, well, I think if, you know, with hindsight, if we'd known what Earth was going to happen, of course we would have done. But it's not how we felt at the time. When witnesses come before select committees, they're often quite sort of tense and nervous. Yeah, Alistair Campbell was pretty nervous when he first appeared before us. And it was quite clear that, you know, Dr. Kelly was a genuine bloke trying to do his best. But the question really to be asked is, if he was susceptible to pressure, what on earth was the MOD putting him up in the first place? The Select Committee asked to see a number of Foreign Office officials, and Jack Straw, the Foreign Secretary, opted to come in their place. We asked to see Dr. Kelly, who was working in the Ministry of Defence. It was quite open for Jeff Hoon, the Secretary of State for Defence, to come in his place if he thought that this would put pressure on Kelly. It is for the MOD to decide whether or not he was up to the job.
Did you have any reason to doubt the veracity of the evidence that Dr. Kelly gave you?
No, I mean, this man is probably the most experienced expert in the world on chemical and biological weapons. And when he comes before us and starts talking about it, I didn't doubt him at all.
You mentioned that Alistair Campbell, the government's Director of Communications, was nervous when he came before you. We now know that Campbell debated with the chairman of the Joint Intelligence Committee about the contents of that September dossier.
Yes.
Does that concern you, that here was an unelected advisor debating intelligence matters?
And I think it's very dangerous when you put unelected special advisors in charge of intelligence committees. And in fact, this was a finding of the Select Committee, that he shouldn't have been in that position. And I think this is the sort of trouble you get into when you put people like this in this type of information.
So your reservations were about the powers that he had, or the way that he exercised them, or both?
Both. I mean, I don't...
And you're glad he seems to be going?
Yes, though it's interesting that he now denies it, and all this going stuff. I think it's just another Campbell-esque type exercise of spin and counterspin here. Is he going, isn't he going? It's a distraction from the story.
Your committee seems to have shied away from the point that the government may have lied about intelligence. You use the word misrepresent. You say that the February dossier that the government brought out was badly handled and was misrepresented as to its provenance.
Yes.
But you then say that ministers did not mislead Parliament. Can't have it both ways, can you? Misrepresenting is misleading.
Yes, and I think the committee
you fudged it.
Is contradicting. Yes, and that's why I voted against the report. I do believe there was a misrepresentation of Parliament. I mean, the exact words the Prime Minister used about what subsequently became known as the dodgy dossier was that this was, to paraphrase, this was the best the intelligence services work, and it quite clearly wasn't. And that was a misrepresentation. But I also think that the central document, the September dossier on Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, containing these assertions of 45 minutes in uranium, I think that was an exaggeration as well.
So people listening to this are still asking the question, well, did the government lie or did it not?
Well,
where do you come down?
I have reached the conclusion that the government exaggerated the case for war.
Exaggerated but didn't lie?
I don't think there was any lying. I don't think they told an untruth. But there is more than one way to skin a cat. I mean, if you look at these...
They weren't straight, though,
if you look at these central assertions, they are very cleverly worded in a way that produce an implication or an inference which isn't there. I mean, this is a well-known technique used by Alistair Campbell, the Prime Minister. They will make a statement which actually isn't quite addressing the central issue. They will make a denial of something that they've never been accused of. It is very, very clever indeed. But so
you're saying there's a narrow line between spinning and
lying.
And lying.
Yes.
And lying.
Yes. And I think they were just on the honest side of that line.
How credible should people see your committee as being? You say you thought the value of your hearings was that you highlighted questions. The questions were known anyway before you sat down to deliberate, weren't they? There was little that was new that came out. You didn't answer the central question about whether Britain should have gone to war. You posed it and you asked it of many different people. But the jury's still out,
Yes,
isn't
it is. And I think the Intelligence Committee, which is still having hearings and has much greater access to the intelligence, will hopefully be able to dig a little deeper.
So you didn't solve the questions and a man died as a result of your hearings?
Yes.
It's a bad record for your committee, though,
Though, to be fair to the committee, we had concluded our report and published it before we invited Dr. Kelly back, invited Dr. Kelly. So there is actually, there's not necessarily a link here.
But you were hindered from getting information that you wanted. You had restricted access to witnesses and intelligence material.
Yes.
You didn't see raw intelligence. You
Correct.
didn't get the advice that intelligence services gave to ministers.
You're absolutely
There's
right.
a long list of what you didn't get and
Yes.
a very small list of what you did.
Which is, well, I actually think the Select Committee report unearthed quite a lot of things. It got, I mean, just take one illustration, the assertion that, that weapons of mass destruction could be deployed within 45 minutes. It was alleged that this was inserted very late into the September dossier. Eventually, the Foreign Secretary confirmed that this was the case. Now, that was actually a rather important point in evaluating the case for war. And there were a number of other examples like that.
But you have your reservations about the way the committee handled it, don't you?
Yes.
You talked about a scattergun approach.
Yes. I think
you were disorganised. You were all over the place.
Well, I think that's a slight exaggeration.
Only slight,
I think
perhaps.
there is a good point here for the Parliament to look at the way select committees work. Questions are asked in a scattergun approach. Sometimes people ask the same questions, sometimes we all miss key questions. And I think what should happen in important cross-examinations, that we should hire counsel to the committee who should take the brief and they should ask questions in a central way, and I think that would be more effective.
You've not got a barrister, you've got a judge now.
Yes.
Who's conducting the inquiry, the Hutton inquiry. How serious, to what extent do you think this is going to go to the heart of British politics here? You said when you saw the committee get underway, you saw the rows of lawyers there. There are clearly very powerful people in this country who have reputations to protect. Are those very powerful reputations on the line with this committee?
I think they are. I think this is politics at its highest level, and it's, the stakes are very high indeed. I think for a democracy to go to war in the situations that we did, and for arguments to be put forward that the case for war was exaggerated, for the key witness then to commit suicide, it is impossible to overemphasize the seriousness of this. And I think reputations are very much on the line here.
How long is it going to take? Do you see it happening in weeks or months?
Well, Lord Hutton, when he was first appointed, said weeks rather than months. Frankly, it could be months rather than weeks. I think when I see the lawyers lining up this morning to make representations, quite clearly this is going to be quite a formal inquiry. Having said that, no one is pressurising Lord Hutton here. It's essential that he gets to the bottom of it, essentially gets to the root of it, and he gives the country what it expects, and that's answers.
Richard Ottaway, nobody's going to look good out of this, are they?
It's very hard.
Not the government, not the opposition, not your committee. There are going to have to be some fundamental lessons learned as a result of what happened. What do you think you'll learn from this?
I think it was a point I made a few minutes ago. I think that if you use intelligence material for political purposes, this is the sort of trouble you're going to get into. That you shouldn't have unelected officials chairing intelligence committees. That the select committee system is in the spotlight, and there is a question mark over the way it operates. I think they are valuable.
The politicians of all stripes bandied around intelligence material as fact. Very rarely did you hear the health warnings that we all know now should accompany these grand claims.
This was a select committee recommendation that qualifications should have been put in, that undue prominence was given to certain assertions. All these things were dug out by the select committee, and I think that, personally, I think that's been very useful.
Richard Ottaway, good to have you on the programme. Thanks very much.
Nice to be here.
Thank you.
Hello again. You'll have been hearing us talking of heat waves. In fact, that's already started in England and Wales, but Scotland and Northern Ireland not yet in the grip of it, but it is going to happen. What we've got tonight is not a particularly cold night. It was cold last night in Sennybridge in Wales, for example, but not so tonight. We've got some mist and some fog patches around, and they'll be with us this morning, but not for too long. They should disperse, and then we're going to see a fair amount of sunshine. For Northern Ireland, Northern and Western Scotland, some thicker cloud producing some splashes of rain, but that will improve as we go through the day and it should tend to brighten up. Now through the day we could well catch a thundery shower in the southwest of England and also in Wales. And here we're looking at a high of 31 degrees Celsius, but our top temperature will be round about the London area at 33 Celsius. But just push down to the coast where we've got a brisker breeze and the temperature will be a more comfortable 22, which is still 72 Fahrenheit. If you are off to the coast today, well, in Margate, we're looking at, as we saw, 22, 23, 24 degrees Celsius between today and tomorrow. And in Penzance, 22 today and 24 tomorrow. Now, for Tuesday, generally, there will be a bit more cloud around. You've got a higher risk of catching a shower than you will do on Monday. And that shower could be heavy. It could also be thundery. It's also going to feel quite humid for many of us. Temperatures really creeping up by then. 28 degrees Celsius in Edinburgh, 22 degrees Celsius, for example, in Stornoway, and a high of 33 to 35, maybe 36 as we move down into London. So if you are out and about, bear that in mind. Temperatures generally about 10 degrees above average. Records could well be broken, and there's the risk of heat stress, not just for humans, but also for animals. Come Wednesday, this is when the temperatures really start to soar. 35 is certainly not out with the realms of possibility, and 36 could also happen. That's it. Bye-bye.
The battle is on to save some of Britain's most historic buildings. Some will live, others may die. Your votes decide. For Britain's endangered buildings, it's a matter of life or death. Restoration starts Friday at 9 on BBC Two.
Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan.
And I'm Tanya Beckett.
This is The World Today from BBC News. Anxious anticipation in Liberia. The first West African peacekeepers are about to arrive. The Anglican Church in the US votes to confirm the appointment of its first openly gay bishop. 9 dead as firefighters continue to battle the blazes in Portugal and Spain.
And in business, all eyes on the banks. The world's second largest gets ready for results.
Hello, welcome to The World Today with an hour of the latest international news, business and sport. In just a few hours' time, the first 300 Nigerian troops should be arriving in the Liberian capital, Monrovia. Their job, to impose calm on a country racked by more than a decade of civil war. This first contingent of peacekeepers will pave the way for a larger regional force. The full deployment of West African forces should be more than 3,000 strong. The Nigerian general in charge told his men they'd be there not to fight any of the factions, but to keep the peace. Aid agencies say that up to 1,500 civilians have died in the last 2 weeks of fighting for the capital.
People went across this morning.
Getting high on the front line, waiting for the enemy or the peacekeepers to come. Cannabis fuels much of this war. With some of the fighters, we walked into the battlefield where the peacekeepers will have to go soon. Deciding when and how will be a difficult job for them. Now that President Charles Taylor has delayed leaving the country, the rebels may not be so ready to stop fighting and to pull back. This is the approach to Monrovia's Old Bridge. Abandoned stalls marking what's been one of the hottest front lines in the 2 weeks of fighting for this city. This used to be a thriving market, packed with people at all hours of day and night. 300 peacekeepers on the ground is not going to change that quickly, but it is the first step, and these people believe that one day, soon, this may no longer be a front line. But these government forces believe it can only happen if the rebels pull back now.
peacekeepers cannot touch the road within the capital city.
Frontline General Francis Poipoi says it won't be possible for peacekeepers to deploy while rebels are still in the city, that the rebels have to pull back beyond the city limits first.
Because they have to be better.
Under heavy protection, their leaders believe the lured rebels will still move back.
I'm not a pessimist. I'm quite optimistic that our brothers who are across the bridge on the Bushro Island and those that are in Buchanan will see reason. At the end of the day, the Liberian people don't want war.
And it's for the Liberian people that the peacekeepers are coming. Hundreds of thousands have been living like this for 2 months now, short of water, food and medicines. They hope the arrival of peacekeepers from today will mean dark, hot and noisy hellholes like this won't have to be called home for much longer. Paul Welsh, BBC News, Liberia.
Anglican leaders in the United States have voted to confirm the election of the church's first openly gay bishop. The decision to appoint Reverend Gene Robinson as Bishop of the state of New Hampshire follows a threat by Conservatives to leave the church if the appointment goes ahead. The head of the Anglican Church, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Rowan Williams, is said to be concerned it could split the 77 million-member church community around the world. It follows a similar controversy in Britain when gay Bishop-elect Canon Jeffrey John stood down. The bishops of the church in the United States will have a final say on whether to ratify the vote on Monday.
It seemed so matter-of-fact in the end.
C045 has been adopted.
No applause, no drama. Most delegates received this momentous result with quiet acceptance. But traditionalists were quick to warn that grave damage had been done.
They have made a tragic misassessment, but they have taken their action. I think they will be disappointed and startled at how severe a price it exacts upon the Episcopal Church domestically and upon the Anglican Communion.
These delegates have been deeply divided and the vote was close. The decision, though, has still to be ratified by bishops later today. It's not a done deal, but the confirmation of Gene Robinson looks much more certain.
And so it's a kind of a bittersweet moment, because while I rejoice with my gay and lesbian brothers and sisters and all those who are working for full inclusion in this wonderful Episcopal Church of ours, we are also very aware that this is a troubling decision for many in our church.
His daughter and long-term partner joined him on the stage. Gene Robinson hopes his election will herald a new era for the Anglican Church here. But at what cost? Emma Simpson, BBC News, Minneapolis.
The Prime Minister of Portugal says his government will officially declare the forest fires raging across the country a public calamity to enable those who've lost property to claim compensation. The measure is to be approved at an extraordinary cabinet meeting later today. 9 people have died in the fires, which have destroyed thousands of hectares of forest.
At the moment, it's a battle which the firefighters seem to be losing. The harsh heat wave affecting much of Europe has dried out the Portuguese countryside and made it the perfect fuel for flames. Many have been burning for almost a week, sustained and driven forwards by hot winds. Described by the government as a catastrophe, the fires are said to be the worst for 20 years and have already claimed several lives. Nearly 3,000 firefighters are trying to hold the flames back. Italy and Morocco have sent water-bombing planes after an international appeal for help by the Portuguese government. Local people are also doing what they can to try to save their homes and possessions. The fires engulfing Portugal have crossed the border into Spain. Around 2,000 people have been forced to leave their homes as blazes threaten towns and villages in the Extremadura region. The record-breaking heatwave has already claimed more than 6 lives across the country. Claire Marshall, BBC News, Madrid.
Well, fires are also raging out of control in Western Canada's British Columbia. The flames have already ravaged more than 50,000 hectares of forest. Dozens of homes have been destroyed, prompting a government-declared state of emergency. With high temperatures and high winds forecast for the coming few days, there's little hope of improved conditions. In Iraq, American soldiers have mounted a series of raids against suspected Saddam Hussein loyalists around Baghdad. Soldiers from the 3rd Armoured Cavalry Regiment detained dozens of people, including what they're calling a targeted leader. Officers say they're close to capturing the deposed leader himself. In South Korea, a senior executive of the giant Hyundai Corporation, who was facing criminal charges, has been found dead outside his company's headquarters in the capital, Seoul. It's believed that Chung Mon-hun fell from a window on the 12th floor of the building. Mr. Chung was facing allegations that his company illegally handed over $100 million to persuade North Korea to agree to an historic summit with the South 3 years ago. Now let's get some business news. Here's Tanya Beckett.
Adrian, thank you very much indeed. Yes, the world's second biggest bank, HSBC, posts first half results later on. A third of the bank's revenue comes from the Hong Kong market, which is currently weak. And it's also expected to take a hit in its Asian operations on the back of the SARS outbreak. But HSBC's expansion in the US could mean a boost to profits there, and the hope is that will compensate for the problems in Asia. Meanwhile, online travel company eBookers is also posting numbers on Monday. It's expected to have cut its pre-tax losses for the second quarter to around $1.5 million. But there's speculation that American online rivals could be about to make a takeover bid for the company. Let's take a brief look at the markets. I think the closes on Friday from the Dow and the Nasdaq pretty much say it all. As you can see, the Dow falling 79 and the Nasdaq just about 19 points. Some disappointing jobs figures that we saw emerging, but there'll be much more on that when I come back here on the BBC's World Business Report. That's in 20 minutes.
Tanya. 3 Israelis have been injured after their car was shot at in the West Bank. The extremist militant group Al-Aqsa says it carried out the attack. The incident happened shortly after an Israeli cabinet committee agreed the number of Palestinian prisoners it would free from jail. More than 440 prisoners will be released, but the number is smaller than the one recently given by the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. Over 6,000 Palestinian prisoners are currently being held.
More proof of the fragile nature of the ceasefire in the Middle East. An Israeli woman and 2 children were shot as Palestinian militants opened fire on their car near Jerusalem. Members of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade claimed they'd carried out the attack. Earlier, Palestinian security forces had threatened to hand over 17 members of the group to the Israelis. After threatening violence, a compromise was reached and they'll be allowed to remain inside Yasser Arafat's compound. But they've proved they could still derail the peace process. The attack came just hours after the Israeli government confirmed more details of the release of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. 443 will be freed, fewer than Ariel Sharon had first indicated. Around half are thought to have been held for security-related charges. If there are no objections once their names are released, they may all be discharged on Wednesday.
We decided to free a few hundred prisoners, such as have no blood on their hands, as a show of goodwill towards Abu Mazen's government, despite the fact that they don't do much in order to bring to a peaceful solution.
Palestinian militant groups will watch the release closely. It's one of the conditions they've attached to extending their ceasefire, and they'll look for another wave of releases soon. This latest attack, the first for some time, has marred the symbolic importance of the release of prisoners. Israel will be hoping it's done enough to keep Palestinians happy and will in turn expect more to be done to clamp down on extremist groups. James Ingham, BBC News.
Police in the Irish Republic say they're questioning 10 men after uncovering an alleged terrorist training camp in the south of the country. The police have said the find is significant and are linking it to an outlawed dissident faction of the IRA known as the Continuity IRA. A number of firearms were seized. Police say their operation is continuing. Salvage workers in the English Channel have raised the first 3,000-ton section of the Norwegian ship the Tricolor, which sank last December with 3,000 luxury cars on board. In an operation expected to last 6 weeks, the salvage team are cutting the Tricolor into 9 pieces. The wreck, in one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, has already been hit by 3 ships. Human rights campaigners in Argentina have come a step closer to winning their demand that the country's former military leaders be put on trial. The foreign minister has said that the Supreme Court must decide whether existing amnesty laws are constitutional. Last month, Argentina arrested 45 former officers after the Spanish judge, Baltasar Garzon, sought their extradition. Many Argentines would prefer the accused to be tried at home. This is The World Today from BBC News. Still to come, the latest international sport, and the world-famous Edinburgh Fringe Festival is on again. We'll give you a sneak preview of this year's wackiest and weirdest shows. But first, let's join Martine Croxall for a closer look at what's making the news here in the UK.
Thank you, Adrian. Good morning. The Vicar of Soham is urging people not to travel to the town to commemorate the first anniversary of the disappearance of the murdered schoolgirls Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. The Reverend Tim Alban-Jones says at their family's request there'll be no special church services for the girls. The 10-year-olds went missing a year ago. Cigarette packs in Europe could soon carry graphic images showing the harmful effects of tobacco. In the near future, boxes could be sporting lurid images of cancer-ravaged organs to remind smokers of how they're damaging their health. A recent poll revealed that current messages on the packs are being ignored by many smokers. The Prince of Wales moves house today. His new residence is Clarence House. The Queen Mother's former home has undergone a multi-million-pound renovation ahead of the Prince's arrival from St James's Palace. It was the Queen Mother's principal home from 1953 until her death last year. The refurbishment is said to have cost nearly £4.5 million and will be paid for by taxpayers. City dwellers are snapping up small rural farms to get a taste of the country life. A survey by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors revealed that almost half the people buying farms aren't farmers. The study says that 44% of farm buyers are well-to-do city dwellers who don't intend to work on the land. Quick look at the weather forecast now. Today will be dry and sunny in many central and southern areas. There'll be patchy cloud in the north with sunny spells. The south will be very hot, very warm elsewhere.
Hello again, this is The World Today from BBC News. A reminder now of the main international headlines. Liberians await the arrival of the first 300 peacekeepers from Nigeria. The Anglican Church in the United States elects its first openly gay bishop. And coming up in World Business Report, will HSBC's expansion in the US pay off?